poll now, can I? Fantastic. Okay, right, I think we're good to go. So thanks, Lara. Yeah, naturally you'll know that us guys are a team and we've discussed adoption long and hard, but not that specific topic. That was brilliant, Lara, thank you. And a nice sort of connection to what I want to talk about as well. So for those that haven't met me before, just so you know who's talking to you, my name's Gilli Bruce, adopted at 8 weeks old, forced adoption in 1962. So all my life, I've worked as a training consultant and coach. And the last 3 years, I've been working towards qualifying as a counsellor. And I got the news yesterday that I've passed. Yoo-hoo! So I'm naturally now a qualified counsellor as well. Get in. And the whole point of that was so that I could support and work with adoptees, because my life has been something of a trial as well. So the content that I'm going to share today is based on something I've learned in this counselling training. I'm qualified as an integrative counsellor, and so this segment pertains to that. And I'm going to give you links afterwards or ideas of, if you want to go and find out more about this, you'll have some details about that as we carry on. So let's crack on. Tell you what, I'm going to press these buttons instead. So this is about life story and how that comes about. Most of us, a lot of people actually have difficult family experiences. We know that, I forget who it was said it, that families can be dodgy places to grow up in. And very few actually escape childhood completely unscathed. But naturally, us adoptees have a bit more of a slant on that. And so what happens is everybody actually, we all make up a story to make sense of confusing childhood experiences. And we do this because it gives us a say, it gives us some sense of control and a way of kind of managing things. So you find that, whether people were wealthy or poor, whether there was divorce in the family or death or, violence or abuse or addiction, pretty much most children have some kind of story. It might be a positive story. There might be, those that were showered with love and delight may have a story that they were extraordinarily gifted and special and wonderful. But either way, we come out of a childhood with a story about ourselves and the world around us. So everybody does it. And this story, we kind of cobble it together as kids from scraps of images and words and events and scenarios that we made meaning of as a child. And that's the thing, the meaning we made. Yeah, because often we distort it. We only hear little bits, little snippets. We see little scenarios. We don't see the whole. We're not privy to all the facts. So we're making sense of things from little tiny ideas, little scenarios. We forget a lot of it. We forget a lot of the good stuff as well, by the way. So we end up creating this story. And most of us then continue to live through that story that the young self concocted through the filter of a child's interpretation. So I'm going to give you some examples on that, of course. So this whole idea is based on a concept called life script. And it's a theory that comes from transactional analysis, that we all have a life script running through. And of course, this was shaped by our very young selves. So we think about children's stories, in particular, the stories from, for children sort of age 2 to 7, young children's stories. So, you have these ideas, they're very simple. So we get this idea, fairies are all wonderful, dragons are bad. We have fairy tales, legends and fables that contain goodies and baddies, and that's it. And some sort of meaning underpins it all, doesn't it? Like this means that, so you get to sort of, do you remember, I don't know when you were small, but we were taught, watch out there because there might be a funny man or a nasty man. It was the bogeyman, if you like. So young stories are very much black and white. There's not much room for nuance. It's, X equals Y. Do this and that happens. It's cut and dried. So we're taught, what to be afraid of and what good means and who we can trust and who we can't. So we think about the story of the Jungle Book film, it's very much, isn't it? Baloo the bear's the fun one. He's a good friend, and Bagheera's the sensible, wise one. But don't be trusting that tiger, and forget about that snake. And so we get this very, these are the messages we got as kids. Disney does a great job, doesn't it? Actually, of informing us as children. So here's the rub: at whatever age we learned about our adoption story, it's a vulnerable child that makes the meaning about it. The vulnerable child in us that exists to this day. Right now, as we sit here, we've all got that vulnerable child still live, still in us. It's the vulnerable child that gets triggered. It's the vulnerable child that gets adrenalized and dysregulated. The vulnerable child is still in us. And that's the character within us that creates the adoption story. It's our vulnerable child. So I don't know how old you all were when you were told you were adopted. I was told when I was about 2.5, right at that point, where actually all the insecurities are setting in, separation anxiety is setting in. And that's when I was told. Some people didn't find out till really late, but nevertheless, we create that story about it. So that's the first part. So bearing in mind that, okay, so we've all got a story. We've got the meaning we made of what we learned, and it kind of goes like this. The story that the young self creates is really powerful. It has a powerful impact. It provided us with a way of making sense of things, but rarely was that interpretation entirely true. It wasn't the full representation of the facts. It wasn't all the background information. It was snippets that we shaped our story around. And this is important because it shaped our concept. It shaped our concept of self, who we thought we were or are. It shapes our self-beliefs, our self-worth, our self-esteem, our sense of safety, and our sense of belonging. That's the power of the story. It shaped what we thought we were, who we had to be. It shaped our coping strategies, therefore. So we have this story, it's given us some ideas about how safe we are in the world, or our self-worth, or our self-esteem. And so we come up with some coping strategies to cope with that story. We decide, okay, so this is how I better behave then, in order to cope with that story. And then guess what? That's how the world experiences us. So we have this story, we concocted it, and as a result of that, we apply these coping strategies and behaviours, and that's how the world then knows us. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that as we carry on. So it shaped what we allowed ourselves to do, and what we allowed ourselves to be, and what we didn't allow ourselves to even try to become. And I find that pretty sad. It's quite a powerful message that was for me, to realise that this story that we created shaped us. So that's kind of how it goes. So the idea is then that in order to shift that stuff, and in order to create difference in our lives, some story work is a really good idea. It's a great idea to look at that story. And here's the thing. The story we're running is largely lurking in the subconscious. We're unconscious of it. Until I'd heard this life script model, I never even knew I had a story running. What story running? What do you mean? So I'm going to elaborate on this. I'm going to give you examples as we go through. So it's either called story work or it's called life script work. But until we start to get this concept on board, it's back there, way back there. We don't even realize what it is. So story work can really, rattle our comfort zone a bit. When I first landed on my story, it shook me, it rocked me to the core, to be honest. And, it rattles our comfort zone because our nervous system, our bodies like things to stay the way they are. I've adjusted to this, idea of myself. And so it can be a bit rattling to do story work, and super well worth it, of course. So working to uncover our story can expose and bring up uncomfortable emotions. It's not dead easy. And changing our story from a child's interpretation into a realistic adult's version is really empowering, because it allows us to grow and change. So that's the point of story work. We're updating our tapes, if you like. You know, we've got these inner tapes running, like software that's running the show in the background. So actually, if we can update that story from the child's version into an adult's version, we can create some shifts and changes. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. So we said earlier, didn't we, that all children have a story about themselves and the world around them. Some of them are fabulous stories, but most of them are, you know, we all grow up with something. You know, my nose is too big, or I'm too fat, or my boobs aren't big enough. You know, we all grow up with some kind of stuff about ourselves. But adoptee stories, from what I'm hearing, tend to be shaped by similar things. So these are just my ideas. You know, they're not concrete, but these are my story ideas. The picture I've got there is the difference between nature and nurture. You know, so you've got what held that baby and, you know, the nurture element. So adoptee stories then are shaped by what we were told and what we were not told about our birth family and our adoption. Because, of course, we don't get the whole enormous story. We don't get all the background, do we? We hear very little about the birth family, if anything. We hear very little about our adoptive family before we came along. So we get snippets, we get top lines. You know, rarely when we were first told did we get sat down for 2 days, you know, and told all the intricacies that were going on at the time. So we're told some stuff, and there's some stuff we're not told. So that shapes the story. Then you get the meaning we made of what we were told. Am I going to share you my story now? Yes, I am. One of the meanings I made, for example, and somebody mentioned this earlier. Who was it? Somebody mentioned earlier in the chat this nonsense about, you know, you were chosen. You know, we were talking about that earlier in Laura's piece, that I was told I was chosen. So the meaning I made of that was this. My mother and father both used to take their stuff to the dry cleaners. And in the 60s, dry cleaners were really stinky places. They had a very specific chemical smell. I don't know if you remember. And they'd have racks and racks of clothes on a level that was, you know, hand level, but also another level, and then a really high to the ceiling level. And they would pick the dry cleaning off these rails with a big long hook on a stick. So when my mum said I was chosen, I visualised a load of babies in plastic wrappers on rails like they were in the dry cleaners, and my mum and dad coming into the shop and going, "We'll have that one, please," and pointing to this baby in a packet and lifting this packet down off a long hook and being handed over the counter. That was the meaning I had of that. That was the image in my mind, and that stayed for a long time, and with it the associated smell of the dry cleaners that had been put in this hideous shop, you know, in a packet, and I was picked off by a big stick. And that was the meaning I was told. That was an image. So that's what I mean by the meaning we made of the stories we're told. You know, it was that kind of thing. I was also told that when they came to get me, I was in a room by myself. So what do I make of this? The meaning I make of that was an enormous, vast barn kind of building with, it was all dark, but there were slit windows and sunlight coming through, and there's nothing in this vast barn, but right at the very end there's a little cot with a little baby, and it was me, all by myself in this vast space that was dark and a bit scary. So I made me of that sentence, "you in a room on your own," I have this image, you know, that was shocking and sad. And this is what babies do, you know, or young infants do, or children do, or teenagers do, or young adults do. You know, we get a few words and we make meaning of it. From this, we make this, you know, and that's how we shape our stories. So This is also shaped by the amount of bonding, affection, attunement, and love messages that were given to us, and what we heard and what we didn't hear. It's also shaped, as Lara eloquently explained, the adoptive family's understanding of the adoption trauma and empathy. And certainly in 1962, there was none of that. You know, babies were given away like kittens. The blank slate theory, you know, you had no brain, you won't know any of it, and you just hand it over. And also the sense of belonging and acceptance that we experience, and the family environment and dynamics. So early on, that sense of belonging can be a bit rocked if you're different. Yeah, I didn't feel I belonged in my adoptive family because they were all Geordies. They were all from the Northeast, but they'd moved to Birmingham. So they got me in Birmingham. Originally I had a Birmingham accent, can you believe? But that was the difference. So they all sounded like Geordies and I didn't. So straight away, there's a sense of not belonging, of not fitting. You know, and as I grew older, you know, my mum was a very bosomy lady and I am not. So I grew up with the wrong idea that, you know, I was not right as a female because I didn't have enormous knockers, you know. And this was, you know, the kind of things that you kind of are going in, but you don't realise they're going in. So there's a lot there, isn't there? You know, what we're told, what we're not told, the meaning we make of it all, how much affection and warmth and love there is, you know, all this stuff starts to shape the story. So there's a lot going on. So these are some examples of adoptee messages and the interpretations that the child makes or the adoptee makes. Your mummy had to give you away. And the adoptee goes, oh, so I must have been bad, ugly or naughty. You know, we make some meaning of why that happened. The next one, your mummy couldn't look after you. You know, well, I wasn't enough then, was I? You know, there's some other meaning we make. Now we're your parents. Yeah, so the adoptee might go, well, I could be given away at any minute by you then, couldn't I? The adoptee is told you were chosen. So the adoptee thinks, well, I could be unchosen then, couldn't I, on a whim? You know, blimey, that's a bit risky. And this last one, oh, you're so special. And the adoptee thinks, well, I better be special or I'll be given away again. Yeah, you know, it's the meaning we make. And if you imagine those sentences, they're all good. You know, nobody's saying anything horrible there, but it's that interpretation. And my special one, you know, talking about the messages we didn't hear, was my parents said, your mummy couldn't keep you. She wanted you. She couldn't keep you, but she had to give you away. Nothing wrong with that, except what I didn't hear was, and we will not give you away. I didn't hear that bit. So I spend my whole life thinking, crap, you can be given away here. You know, so that's very alarming, very, you know, frightening and scary. So that shapes the story and shapes the behaviours. So that's kind of how it rolls. So the function of stories then, you know, what are they there for? What's this life script story all about? Well, the stories we tell ourselves as young people were created so that we would feel safe. They monitored and checked our behaviour. That's what they're there for. They shut down our questions, they drove our behaviour, they formed our beliefs, and they were created so we'd survive. How clever. You know, the brain's a really clever thing. You know, it's all designed to help us survive. So good stuff, except that when we don't update that story, we carry on living from that place of the frightened, anxious, I might be given away again any minute, you know, that stuff, that's the story that's driving the bus unless we update it. How am I doing for time? Right, okay. So some of the themes of stories, and these, I got this, by the way, from a book called 20 Things Adoptees Wish Their Adopted Parents Knew. So these were really interesting to read. These are themes about how we act out our beliefs held in the story. So, you know, we might evolve to become an inner critic, to engage in lots of negative self-talk about ourselves. You know, I was given away, so I must have been not good enough. Or perfectionism, so as to finally be good enough. You know, we act as, you know, I've got to be a perfectionist here. Maybe we please others a lot. You know, we find ourselves people pleasing, in order to be enough. Maybe we operate with low self-trust or self-doubt because, clearly I'm not good enough. Maybe we operate with imposter syndrome, that whole, waiting to be caught out thing going on. We might end up with relationship difficulties because, well, connection isn't safe. It's not safe to connect, really, is it? So, relationships are going to be problematic. We may find that our behavior is we need to be in control because otherwise it's not safe. We may feel that something's wrong with us, and operate with kind of subconscious shame-based beliefs that I must be somehow faulty, and I must be hidden. Maybe the sensed not belonging, parts of the self are hidden so as to belong. I can't be my whole self. I can show you this bit and this bit and this bit, but I can't show you that bit because, that might not be safe. Or we might act from a position of fear or anger or from shame. And most of us, it's going to boil down to one of those three. Operating in the background, the software will be run by fear, anger or shame. So that's pretty much how it goes for everybody, actually, not just adoptee. So there's a lot there, and these themes were all generated by that story, that life script that we generated early on. So check in at this point. I'm just wanting to check in with you all to see how you're feeling about this stuff. If there's any feelings of resistance or discomfort, do feel free to check out if this is too much. We're going to have a look at story and how we might make those changes next. But if this isn't right for you now, take a break and rejoin in 20 minutes. If you are staying, jot any notes that you might need to. Yeah, because this is, it's big work, this. It's big stuff. So I'm going to give you an example in a minute of some story stuff. And yeah, let's do that now. Okay, so just an opportunity to dip out if you wish to, and stay if you wish to. Okay. So words and phrases in the story, the words can be hot or the words can be cool. And this is about the power of words and language, really, because that's what stories are made of, isn't it? Stories are made of words, phrases, and language. So yes, it's natural for animals or all mammals separated from their mother to experience that pain of loss and attachment issues. All mammals do it. However, the words used play a part in the story. So often we might say that you use the word I. So we need to question what we mean when we say I. I might still refer to myself as I was adopted. Yeah. What meaning do we make of the word rejected? What else gets abandoned? Yeah, these are big words, big, powerful words that create, a big reaction to them. So I'm going to just share a brief story. I have met an adoptee, older lady, she's 73. She was adopted as an infant and she was given away, as she terms it, and she was abandoned. And when she was about 38, she actually tracked down her birth family. They made reunion. They had a relationship for around about 2 years. They didn't see an awful lot of each other because they lived quite far away, but she did see them, about 4 or 5 times a year, and they were in touch. So a relationship is re-established. This goes on for a couple of years. And then the family decided they couldn't cope with it. It was disruptive for them as a unit, bringing up all sorts of feelings. So, it kind of, if you like, drifted away again. So this lady summarizes her story like this. She says to me, I was abandoned when I was a baby, and then I met my parents again, and then I was rejected again. So that's big words, isn't it? To attach to the self of self, when actually that's the child's version. That's the vulnerable child's version of events. And we could talk long and hard, but imagine what a story like that does to somebody. If we have a story about ourselves that says, I was abandoned and I was rejected again, big words, what does that do to somebody? It diminished this lady, particularly with diminished in self-concept. She'd put boundaries up around getting close to others. She'd set up a behaviour pattern of needing to be very guarded, very walled off, needing to be in control, to be perfect. Her conduct was very much caretaking, controlling, and very much pleasing others. So this had driven her behaviour. Those few words, powerful: I, abandoned, and rejected. Because they were the ingredients of her story. They'd shaped her life up to the age of 73 until she came to do this story work. So remembering that those are the child's interpretation. So I would just like to make endeavours to look at those words. I was abandoned, and then at 45, sorry, it was 45, I was rejected again. What words might an adult impartial observer use instead? It might be something like this: an infant experienced attachment trauma. Now, we know from sort of existential theory that actually all our cells in our body are changed every 7 years. We're all like Trigger's broom, aren't we? Do you remember off Only Fools and Horses? Trigger had a broom and he kept saying, this is my broom, but it had umpteen thousand new heads, umpteen thousand new sticks, but he called it my broom. And Trigger's broom is what human beings are. You know, I'm 60 now. So on all my life, you know, there's not a cell in my body that exists now from when I was a baby. So which I am I referring to? I'm also very into Buddhist theory, and we talk very much about what do we mean when we say the word I. You know, which I is that we're talking about? So the concept of I is a fascinating concept. The next bit, it wasn't possible for the infant to be cared for by her mother, and the mother had to relinquish the infant child due to these circumstances. That's a much kinder story. It's less emotive. You know, it's not the big, massive words of I was rejected. You know, it was somebody couldn't be cared for by their mother. The baby had to be relinquished, or the child had to be relinquished because of, and then the story starts again. So this is just an invitation to think about the words we're using. You are not your story. This is why it's powerful. The story is the problem. We're not the problem. Yeah, we are not the problem. The story is. The story created all the limiting beliefs about ourselves. Our story notices our flaws and our mistakes, and it ignores and diminishes the good things, or dismisses them, sorry. We can now separate from our story that we concocted and have compassion for our younger self that created that story. We can set ourselves free to create an adult version of the story, acknowledging what was difficult and serves our future better. So that's the point of this work. Let's free ourselves of those, you know, really emotive, damning words and create something that helps us to move on with a different kind of flavour. So common responses to early trauma stories. These are sort of some quotes of what people have said to early trauma, whether that's adoption or other early trauma. I need to be strong and figure it all out on my own. See if any of these land for you, by the way. I have to consort myself to be likeable. I can't be the whole me. There's something wrong with me, or I'm different. I need to hide parts of myself to fit in. I mustn't show my negative feelings, in particular my anger. It isn't safe to have needs, wants, or opinions. I need to be easygoing to get my needs met. I need to succeed, try hard, be perfect to have some worth. I need to earn support, love, or acceptance. I need to please others in order to be loved. So that's just, you know, some samples there. So just seeing if any of these land for you, really, as we go along. I think mine, for sure, you know, I had this thing that I mustn't show negative feelings. I couldn't be angry. It wasn't there. Don't, you know, it's too risky. So this is just an example for you. I'm going to share my wounded, vulnerable child story. So this is from my heart to yours. This was my take on what I was told and not told. I was given away. I'm not safe. I could be given away at any time. I'm on my own here. Very definitely, I'm on my own here. And I thought that by the time I was 2.5. So I became this angel child. I need to be a delight. I mustn't be any trouble. and I need to do what I need to do to survive. That's my adoptee story. That's the story that was running in my subconscious until I did story work or script work. I didn't know that. It was way back there. But this sense of, it's not safe, absolutely not safe. I'm on my own. I must be a delight, I must be in trouble, and I've got to do what I need to do to survive. There was some positives in that, actually, because this idea of, you know, surviving made me work flipping hard and create a good career for myself. You know, it had some positive drivers, but, you know, that's not what I want to be anymore. I don't want to be feeling I'm not safe and I've got to be a delight and I mustn't be any trouble, and that doesn't serve me anymore as an adult. So my invitation is that we get free of our story. So there's an invitation for you to have a think about your own story and get free of it. And these are the steps. We identify the story. We give it a name. We relate to the story as a temporary feature of life, not a permanent fixed feature. We honour and we grieve the story, we validate it, and then we contemplate the story and how it's affected our lives. You know, have I been a people pleaser? Yeah, here. Have I never felt safe enough to show my anger? Yeah, here. Have I been my authentic self? Not me. You know, this is what my story did to me. This is what I'm sharing with you. So our job is then to start to do some work and change the old story for a new, more inspiring one. I'm going to just may run over a minute or two, but I'm just going to whiz through these. So ways to work out the story are, you know, tap into your body. Some of the stuff Claire did with us earlier was great. That helped to get in touch with the vagus nerve, which runs through the whole piece. Do some kind of artwork, music, writing, singing, poetry, movement, dance, Tai Chi. Tap into what's going on in the body and what the story is telling us. Do journal work. Capture things like those images, like that thing I shared about the dry cleaners. You know, capture stuff about the images, memories that stuck, significant incidents where the story ran your behaviour, words, experiences. Look at doing some collaborative sharing with another. You know, there's lots of inexpensive therapies are available to do that work. You know, I do work for Mind, the mental health charity Mind as a counsellor. And, you know, you can access that for a £5, a small donation is all that's required. Or there's another charity called Night Stop. You know, there's really inexpensive ways to do that work. Connect with nature was massive for me. You know, tuning into the natural world and being part of it. Spiritual practice I found very useful. Or fellowship programs. You know, I joined CODA, which is about being codependent. I joined SLA, which is about being addicted to love. And I'm considering thinking about ACA, which is Adopted Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. So your family doesn't have to have been alcoholics. If it was just a bit dysfunctional, you know, it still works for us. So there's some fellowship programs there that you can access everywhere in the country and globally, actually. I notice some of you live in other parts of the world. So start to, you know, just see what comes out of all that stuff. And then we can start to create an updated adult version of the story that takes in more of the details that we now understand and helps to shift things. So we journal out the old story and its effects. We take our time and we get support if needs be. We practice self-care and self-compassion. You know, we come to stuff like this, you know, we share with other adoptees and get a handle. We have courage to accept some discomfort, fear, or confusion. We reframe some key points. One of mine was, I can't be my whole self, which I've now switched into, I deserve to be my full self and can practice being my authentic self from now on. The inner child carries the story, and your inner parent can put it down and create a new story. So reparenting work is fantastic for this. So we get mindful, we get curious, and we move into possibility. Who, what, or how would you prefer to be now for the next part of your life? Keep repeating the new version to ourselves and others. So a sample for you, this is just to sort of give you a taster really. This is my new story. This is my adult story now that I've recreated. Adoption was difficult. My story about it led to my distorting myself in order to stay safe. My adoptive parents didn't know what I needed. They didn't know about attachment trauma or the lifelong impacts of adoption. My parents had their own stories and distortions operating too. I am now responsible for who I want to be and my well-being. I attend to my healing journey and my own happiness. The real me is evolving day by day. There have been positives. And lastly, I love this one. The wound is where the light gets in. I'm more evolved and happier than many non-adoptees because I've done the work. So I leave you with this, living into a new story. I love this picture. Limitations live only in our minds, but once we use our imagination, our possibilities become endless. So here we go. From a place of self-acceptance, we define the updated version of the software you're going to install into your system, because your life story operates like software in your computer. It's running in the background. It's running the show. So we need to sort of update our software, and install it into our systems. Identify what is now important. Which new behaviours will you practice? What will you now allow yourself to explore? Imagine a desired future 5 years from now and work backwards from there to see the steps needed to get there. So that's my encouragement or invitation for you all. So I'm going to just hit stop share while I just tell you a little bit about where that comes from. So that came from, it's a counselling modality, they call it, called transactional analysis. And in particular, a segment of that, which is called Life Script. Now, if you Google this, you'll see loads. There's loads of books on it, and there's stuff on YouTube about it. If you want to Google Life Script, you're going to get loads about it. But there's 3 books in particular that I made a note of. Life Scripts by Ursula Markham. I'll put these in the chat over lunch as well. Life Scripts by Stephen M. Pollum, and Life Scripts, a TA, Unconscious Relational Patterns. So this is, it's deep work, it's big work, but I just wanted to give you that snippet because that can be life-changing, when we land on our script work. Also have a look on YouTube, because the Counselling Tutor have a whole piece about life scripts. So it's, it's therapeutic work. It's not light, but it's, really, really valuable stuff. And the reason I would encourage you is, this is a fabulous book, Daring to Trust by David Rico. There he is. And on page 86 of this, he talks about doing story work. And this is what the sentence I wanted to leave you with, because he says, our story shapes our belief about ourselves, and changing it changes us from victim to victor with shrapnel. Not such a bad title to give our story. I love that. Victor with shrapnel. Yeah, that's us. So that's my piece from some of the real restorative work that's that I've done that's worked for me, and I would encourage you with. So I'm having a look if there's any questions.